Hello, today is the 10th presentation on research. The topic for today is research design. So we know that these are the steps that we follow when we carry out research, and each of these steps is very important. They are logically connected, and only when we follow the step in a very sequential manner do we find a method of carrying out research which is acceptable by the reader. So that is very important, that we follow very steps which are very clear. So when we conduct research, we say that we first work it out in our mind. There is a blueprint. So all things are made twice. So once the first time is in our mind, and research design is something that we need to reflect upon, work through it several times, read several times, reflect upon it, discuss, and then we come to what is to be done in the research. So this research design has got essential components of how we are going to carry out research. If we spend enough time on how to carry out our research well, with the justification that we need, why are we choosing these kind of steps in the research at a later stage when we have to execute the research, it becomes much easier. Now, why do we carry out research design? First of all, we need to be clear about the procedures that we are going to follow to carry out research. So the method, the procedures, the systems, the steps that we follow must be valid, it must be objective, and it must be accurate. So it cannot happen that once we have started the research, then we start looking for, if we have missed out something, then we cannot go back. Often we cannot go back to a data point that we may have missed out because we did not think enough of that. And I always remember that situation where I had missed out one particular variable in my socioeconomic data, and when I was working on it with a professor, he asked me, "Did you collect this particular data?" And I said, "I did not think about it." So I was asked whether I could go back to collect the data. It was not possible because when you collect primary data, people are gone by and you may not be able to collect that data again. So it's very important that we collect the required data, we plan it well, and then we carry on with our research. So we can collect our research in a carry out our research in a very systematic way if we follow a research design well. And it will also give you a structure for collecting the data. Here again, the question is, how are you planning to carry out your research? What is the frame in which you're going to work? What are the units that will be there in your research? Now, what is the rationale for choosing steps? This is very important. Now, you cannot choose any step just because it is convenient, it is familiar, or somebody has suggested. Your topic requires you to take up subjects which are uniquely yours. And then we want to measure certain variables. Now, what are the procedures that you're going to follow to measure the variables that you have in mind? How will the relevant information be collected? How are you going to understand the very many interrelated decisions that will be that you will have to make? And above all, the research design that you make must be workable, must be manageable. If not, we will find that you fail a while, lots of time is wasted in running through the data. So it is important at this stage that even if you spend more time on recreating the research design, it is good to do that, because the other part of work, once we are clear how to do that, it can be easily done. This planning stage is the most difficult stage in carrying out the research processes. Now, what are these components of research design? First is, what are the different types of research design that are available, and which is the design that you may want to take up. I'm sure that you have started reading on that, or your research methodology classes might have introduced you. But nevertheless, let me remind you that it is good to remember that there are different techniques of carrying out collecting the data, and there are different kinds of research design that will suit the kind of data that you are interested in collecting. And the methodology of collecting data, or the methodology of the research design itself, has to be very, very logically consistent. So this will tell you the type of the data needed, what is your data, the primary data or secondary data. So let me come to the components of research design. So when we say research design, we are talking about the types of research design. We're also talking about the different techniques that are available in research design. It can also mean that we have to be clear about the techniques and the design that we need based on the topic that we have taken, based on the questions that we have raised, and the objectives that we have set out to study. And then we also need to know how do we identify the population from which the sample is to be taken, and the method of sampling that is required to be collected. So what is the procedure for collecting data? Data can be collected in different ways, and so what are the procedures that we may want to use to collect the data? What kind of a hypothesis is designed, therefore, to meet that hypothesis, what kind of data is required? Then what are the tools and methods that you will have for your analysis? So this is equally important. What are the tools that you have with you? Statistical tool, econometric tools, or whatever. What are the tools that you have, and how are you going to use it for analysis? Each design is unique. It depends upon the individual researcher, the priorities of the researcher, or the choices that the researcher makes. So there are broad guidelines, but by and large, you will have to choose what suits your topic of research. Now, what determines, there is also an external element here. What are those external factors other than your subject which can influence your choice of research design? And here I mean the discipline that you are studying. You're from economics or sociology or anthropology, or your psychology or political science, any of this history. Now, based on these disciplines that we come from, each of this discipline uses different research designs suiting to the problems that each of the discipline can raise. We also need to keep in mind what are the research objectives and questions. So what is your training in economics, statistics, or econometrics? So a student of economics must definitely have knowledge in these three areas to continue their research. So the research design will include these terms. Whereas for other subjects, it depends how statistics is used in their study. Accordingly, they could plan their design. We also need to understand whether the study is going to be a quantitative study or a qualitative study. I shall explain the two terms a little later. Then we also need to know what is the time required to gather data, what is the ability of the researcher to enter the data into the system. Then are we ready with the software of computers? Are we ready with Word and Excel, Stata, and SPSS? Because if you want to analyze data, all these methods must be known. So it is a good idea here to learn statistics, those who may require some statistics, to learn statistics, and also to learn the software that is required to carry out research. So good research design increases trust in the accuracy of the data. So once we have made our data collection in a very systematic manner, then there is a reliability of the data that we have collected. Approaches. So quantitative approach. In the quantitative approach, we will understand the use of statistical methods, and the other thing, the data is collected for being treated by the statistical methods. So surveys, interviews, and are the principal methods of collecting research using quantitative approach. So quantitative approach gives in what is the data that is available, what is the situation available. That kind of a data is one that can allow itself to be treated in a quantitative manner. Qualitative subject, it is not that all subjects have to be handled only in a quantitative manner. The same subject can also be studied in a qualitative manner. So when we are talking about qualitative study, we are talking of opinions, patterns of tendencies, of larger areas of interest that we may have, which may have some theoretical framework, but we can carry it on in the descriptive, in the qualitative method. It is also value laden because there are opinions and subjective decisions. Opinions are taken of people. It is during this kind of a study there are unexpected variables that can emerge, and these kind of studies are usually done using interviews or in-depth case studies or direct field work, and observations that are taken up, or open-ended interviews that we can carry out. So there could be written documents. All of these can generate the idea which is required for carrying out qualitative studies. But in real life also, we also understand that there are scholars who mix both quantitative and qualitative studies, and the same subject which can be studied maybe in the quantitative manner also has a qualitative aspect. So it can be mixed and studied. There is a mixed method that is followed, and in this mixed method it is quite flexible depending upon the choice and the need of that individual researcher. They can use these methods. So which method is better? That's not the question. It depends on what emphasis the researcher wants to give to which method. So that is left to the researcher. But then we have a reason why we have chosen that particular method. The other important item here is to understand the variables. There could be some variables that you might have studied during your literature review, but you have missed out now. So it's a good idea to go back to the literature, important pieces of literature, and see whether you have missed out any important variable. At this stage, we can say that variables are independent or dependent variables. Let me take this example of dependent variable to start with: income and savings of an individual. Now, income and savings are dependent variable. It is dependent on some other factors, on some other variable. It could depend upon the course that the person has as an engineering course, whether it has done a course in social sciences, or done a course in the education qualification is about an art or music or textile, whatever. So the nature of the course that the person has studied can influence the income. Then it could be the probably the age of that person. It could be the marital status. It could be the region that a person is located. All of these are possible to affect the income of an individual. So those factors which are affecting the income of a person is called as independent variable. The one that is affected is called as the dependent variable. Students often make a mistake on that. It is to be clear that the one that is affected is called as dependent. The one that is affecting is called as independent variable. So there are various variables that you will come across, and therefore make a list of them as you go by and identify which are those dependent variables that you want to actually study. Then we also have variables like categorical variables and continuous variables. In the case of categorical variables, these values are mutually exclusive. It could be like gender, male, female, or transgender. In that particular case, the respondent will tick only one. So it could be, they are mutually exclusive in that sense: married, unmarried, widowed, widower, divorcee. So there only one is possible. That is called a categorical variable. The other one is called a continuous variable, where we are talking about each respondent can have a different value. For example, age of a person, the income of a person, the weight of a person. These are continuous variable. One mistake that I have seen scholars doing is they collect the data itself wrongly, where they would have already made categories of income or height or weight or whatever, and they put it into that category. So then it becomes difficult to use statistical methods on that, or econometric methods on that. So it is important here that when you collect the first respondent's income, write it at 10,000. Second respondent's income is 10,500, then let it be written as 10,500. Fourth person's income, fifth person's income. Just make a list of the income as it goes by according to that number. Then when you are processing it during your analysis of the data, all the other things can be done. But at the collection stage, these are continuous variables and they should be collected only as continuous variables. These are necessary for testing your hypothesis or for other statistical procedures. Then types of research design, we have a couple of research design. There are several research designs that are put out. I'm just explaining 3 or 4 of them which can be of some help to you to understand which design you may want to use. When we are studying something totally new where there is no research, much research available, things that are interesting but at the same time we don't have in-depth data on that, in such cases exploratory studies are useful. So it can generate new ideas, it can generate maybe a new variable, it can make you have some in-depth knowledge about a subject that you were not aware of. So in such studies, pilot surveys are useful, in focus group discussions are useful. For example, when I had to study the perception of quality of college students, it was very difficult to get any paper on that. But though with an interesting topic. So there what we did was we had a focus group study by collecting about 50 students from different colleges pursuing different courses and of categories of courses, and then we try to understand what are those ideas that students have, and then we converted them into variables and then we followed the research. So group discussion can be very interesting and can generate a lot of ideas when we want to study some qualitative aspect of an interest. We can also have descriptive study where we try to explain how something is happening, who are the ones who are affected, what are they doing, and what is the effect on them, or what are they how are they doing this. For example, studies on let me think of example, say using carpooling. Now, how many people do that? Why do they do that? How are they doing it? How do they connect with themselves? That's one. Maybe you could also look at tourism, and then you want to understand how tourists are affecting the culture of a particular a locality or a region. In which case, you must be trying to understand what are the kind of food that is now the new kinds of food that is being cooked, or what is happening to homestays, what happens to family arrangements of living because homestays have been given, what happens to the employment of women because homestays are there, what happens to the many the activities that people may be engaged because a region has become popular for homestay. So these kind of studies are descriptive in nature, where we describe some phenomenon by all the questions of who, where, what, why, and so on. Analytical research, they are facts or information that are available, and then we analyze the data for the research objectives that we have in mind. We can also do comparative studies, are also very interesting when we have to compare one firm to another firm to third firm, or we categorize firms and then compare the firms. Again, for example, the study that I had encountered, we had categorized the labor intensive industry, which was the ready-made garment industry, the knowledge intensive industry, which was the pharmaceutical industry, and the technology driven industry, which was the automobile industry. So we had categorized our industry into three, and then we wanted to compare how the training is done or offered in these three kinds of industries, the same questions, but how these are done in three industries. And because it was done in three industries, what were the effects and what was the outcomes, and so on and so forth. So we can easily convert an interesting area into comparative study when we want to compare regions or firms or groups of people or whatever. So this is another way of study. Then we can have experimental studies, but it is now economics has started using experiments in the subject of behavioral economics, but otherwise the subject of psychology is known to be using experiments in their research. We also have applied research, where we usually find scholars from social work who carry out action research. They may intervene in a group of people with some action, and then they see the effect of that in the next time that they meet them, and so on. So where there is an intervention, they try to solve a problem, or they provide a solution, or they create something new in a particular region because of that action that they take. So that is also called as action research, sometimes in a group, society, or individual. So there has to be a strong reason as to why we want to choose a particular design, and whatever it is, the logistical details need to be created in our mind. We need to work out the logistical details of how are we going to do this task of the design that we have taken, and only then should we proceed to carry out research. So thank you. And we shall see how we can collect data, especially the primary data, and some of the um, mm, interesting ways we have found in the. Thank you. And we shall see how we can collect primary data in the next presentation.